Hi everyone, welcome to the Defended by Nature podcast, the show where I explore whether restoring natural processes and features can defend us against some of our biggest global challenges, such as flooding, drought, poor water quality, food security, and declining biodiversity. I'm Kat Teakle. I'm a hydrologist with 19 years of experience as a consultant, specialising in flood risk management and restoration of water environments. In this episode, I'm talking with Josh Wolstenholme. He is a Vice-Chancellor Independent Research Fellow at Loughborough University. His area of research seeks to understand how sediment movement through river catchments ultimately impacts flood risk. This follows his earlier research into sediment movement around natural flood management features, specifically leaky wooden dams. Join us as we discuss the complexities of flood management, the role of citizen science in data collection, how we should all embrace failure as a learning, and so much more. I can't wait for you to listen in on our conversation today. But first, can I ask you a small favour? If you enjoy our conversation today and think that someone you know might find it interesting, please, can you share it with them? Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much for doing this with me today, Josh.
No, it's okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, a bit of background. I was working on a project last year for an estate in the southeast of England. And I'm going to stop clicking my pen because that's not going to be a great thing. So last year I was working for an estate in southeast England, and I worked up a scoping study for them. They were doing landscape regeneration, and from my scoping study, they went for funding and ended up having a conversation with Natural England. From that conversation, they were asked to develop this big project, and they kind of put it out to tender. And so we ended up needing like a huge team to deliver the work. And so I ended up speaking to all these really interesting people as part of putting together this bid. And I thought these conversations are so interesting. And I actually think they could be so valuable to people that are working in our industry. Even I've been working in this industry for like nearly 20 years. And, I've never spoken and had an in-depth conversation with a soil scientist before about delivering landscape regeneration,
Mhm.
which for that particular project involved natural flood management. It involved like kind of increasing biodiversity, ponds, and like loads of different elements of like kind of landscape management, like all bundled up into one, and they would package it under landscape regeneration. And I thought, I think other people might be interested in this too. And I know so many different people. And I mean, we first met in 2019
Yeah, it was at
at
Flood and Coast,
Flooding
right?
Coast. Yeah. And I went and found my top trump
Oh, you still
cards.
got the top trumps. Are they still in the wrapper inside?
I actually took them out earlier, but yeah, they were still in the wrapper, which I felt quite bad about because they're actually really great. So they've come with me. I now live in France, so I've moved countries and I still have them. So I love that. And you did that with Chris Skinner, didn't you?
I wasn't involved in making them, but I was at Flood and Coast with Chris at the time. Yeah. So Chris was my PhD supervisor, and we were basically just using them to kind of get people to come and talk about Hull, which is where I was.
Yeah, because you also had the VR headsets as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so I think that was following Chris's Flash Flood program that's kind of on YouTube and that people can use in teaching and everything.
Yeah. So I had a little delve into your background on LinkedIn, but also I think you've got like a Google Scholar thing and
Yeah.
also your University of Hull. And I can see there is this running theme of like you are engaging with the community, and that does seem to come out in your CV that you work quite a lot with the local community. And was there schools in there as well? You were doing some outreach things with schools too?
Yeah, so I'm one of the climate ambassadors that run out of Reading, I think, climate ambassador program, which basically engages with academics or people who work in industry to go into schools and help them to build and deliver their climate action plan. So it's all about educating and upskilling members of the community, really, with a school-based focus for that. But a lot of my work and what I'm trying to move into a little bit more is how we can use different types of technology to kind of monitor flood risk and sort of look at that geomorphological change, which is really lacking in some of our numerical models. So how we can better collect that data and to what quality it can be. So if I went out and collected some data, for example, I'd be focused on getting like the millimeter error level down to the smallest amount. But do we really need that? What we really need is data distributed throughout the catchment. And I think a good way to collect that data is to work with community groups and empower them to use tools that they've already got.
Yeah, I completely agree. Citizen science, I think it is a very powerful way to collect a lot of information when you need it. And I think you're right. You don't always need to the millimeter accuracy. You don't always need the level of detail that we think we do. Actually, sometimes we do just need an overall picture. So you may have seen in my email, or you will have seen in my email, that I've put together some questions. I kind of gave a bit of a background because I didn't want you to just think, what is this woman doing? To kind of give you like a bit of a understanding of where I was coming from. And so do you mind introducing yourself and kind of in the sense of like who you are and what you
Yeah,
do?
no problem. So I'm Josh Wolstenholme. I am a Vice Chancellor Independent Research Fellow at Loughborough University. And sort of all of my work revolves around understanding how sediment that moves throughout river catchments ultimately impacts flood risk. So I do that using a mixture of numerical methods, so building models to see how the environment changes, but also going out and collecting field data to help validate and verify those models. And increasingly, I'm trying to work more and more with the community so we can collect that data that I just spoke about a little bit there, but also to deliver education around why sediment is important in river systems. 'Cause they don't just transport water, but that's the least uncertain thing that we can kind of monitor and model.
Yeah. I really like that element of your research because I think we can be too focused on the amount of water above ground. And I think I read in one of your papers that we're oversimplifying and that actually this complexity isn't perhaps something that we should be ignoring. That was kind of what I took away when I was reading through some of your papers. Does that sound like have I understood that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, understanding how the water moves through the system is super important, but I'm going to steal a quote from Dan Parsons here, which is, "We're really good at predicting flood risk next Tuesday, but not good at predicting it in winter for this year or next year." And the
Yeah.
reason for that is because we don't understand or we can't forecast very well how the river system is changing in terms of sediment being moved. And we can't always assume that river systems are static because they're not. They transport sediment, they transport wood, they transport other debris, whether it's litter or kind of fish or other animals. And so we need to understand how these processes impact the shape of the river and ultimately what that means for the resultant hydrology. And what I'm kind of working on more and more at the moment as part of my fellowship is how sediment moves through a flood event actually causes the flood to become more and more extreme further downstream. So
Yeah.
we're changing that river capacity over a case of like a few hours in some environments, but our flood models don't really look at that yet in enough detail to what they need to. And we also don't really know at what point it becomes important. So if we have lots of storms back to back that are relatively kind of small in terms of their order of magnitude, is that the same impact as one extreme event? And we just don't really know yet.
Yeah. That I think that's so interesting. I think that's really interesting because as a hydrologist and someone that has put together like teams to deliver hydraulic modeling outputs for flood mapping and such, we get like the topographic survey, but that is just like a snapshot in that moment while the topographic surveyors are out. And what I'm understanding from what you're saying is that actually that might only be true for then. And then after we've had big storms, actually, the changes in the riverbed, they might actually impact the shape of the channel. And then actually that topographic survey potentially becomes a bit redundant. But I think
Yeah.
that's the point that you made was like, at what point does it become redundant? I think that's a really interesting question. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the point at which it becomes redundant is very true, and obviously it differs throughout both time and space. So, at what point do you kind of other catchments when their sediments moving around, so they're a bit more dynamic, right? At what point does that then influence the lower, maybe more stable river system? And at what point is it building up all of this sediment that can lead to like a cascade failure? Same with natural flood management in some instances. We have all these leaky dams, but at some point they're going to degrade and fail potentially, especially if they're not being resupplied with wood, whether that's naturally or artificially. What happens when they all rot and you have a big sediment slug that moves downstream? What's the impact of that? I think broadly we don't really know.
No, we don't know. No, that is, yeah, it's a good question because I can see the two ends of it, like, and also perhaps it could add extra weight perhaps to the upper catchment work because if we're controlling the sediment up in the upper catchment, which is one of the benefits of natural flood management, is that as well affecting what's going? Well, I mean, of course, it is going to be affecting downstream as well. So yeah, what an interesting area of study. And have you been studying this for very long, or is this like a relatively new area of research for you?
So throughout my PhD, it was all about the influence of leaky wooden dams and on local geomorphology, and can we put that into a numerical model, which we did and was published earlier this year. And the focus on that was really to understand what their influence on sediment transport was. And if we modeled an environment with and without sediment, but with the dams at different configurations, what's the impact on the resultant hydrology effectively? Is it increasing the number of peaks that we see? Is it reducing them? Is it increasing the magnitude of them? Or is it actually storing a lot more water in the catchment than we think? And sort of, I've transitioned away from the more natural flood management side of things into the more fundamental sediment transport scope, which I've been working on kind of for the past couple of years and building towards this now independent research looking at it. And I think it's a really interesting topic that's got some potentially really exciting results and can change how we, at least how we operate, because geomorphic kind of variability is really, really good for catchments. But if that's influencing how we understand flood risk resultant downstream, it's making sure that we're able to communicate to people, okay, you've had all this gravel move, and that's great because of X, Y, and Z, but you need to be aware that your flood risk has increased because of it. And sort of how we go about managing that sustainably but safely and with the people who are might be at risk in mind or who might be at risk in 20 years that aren't now.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting. I feel like we've delved straight into the detail of what you do, but I think that's really like important information and like it's something to keep an eye on, I think, definitely, like, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have these kinds of conversations because you're at university doing this work and you're obviously presenting at conferences and things,
Yeah.
but like I haven't seen you present recently. I'm not sure I've actually seen you present before, but I hadn't learned about that information until I knew I was going to be interviewing you and I started looking into your papers and things. And actually, what you're talking about could have actual practical applications to people that are looking at flood risk every single day, writing flood risk. I mean, a huge part of my business, writing flood risk assessments and actually being aware that, and like kind of talking to our clients and the people that we're engaging with, that actually we always say we're estimating flows, we can't, these aren't definite because
Yeah.
we're basing it on data from previous like floods, and we don't know for definite we're going to get the same floods again. But this is another element of uncertainty that we need to factor in when we're considering what we're doing when we're assessing flood risk. So I think this is a really great conversation. I'm really pleased we're able to have this conversation today. So one of the kind of questions I wanted to ask was like, what is one of the things that you are always telling people that you wish that everyone would know? Like, do you have something that when you're speaking to the community or you're talking with like your peers, like that you find yourself repeating? Do you have anything like that that you say regularly?
Yeah, I think probably the broadest one is that there's so much power and potential for working with community groups, no matter what kind of research you're doing. I think that there's so much local knowledge, whether it's on kind of flooding or geomorph stuff or biodiversity or whatever. There's so much local knowledge that you as a researcher or as an individual or as an industry person can learn from these individuals, and they really know what they're talking about, even if they don't know like the equations behind all the flow, because they don't need to, right? They're experts in their local environment. And I think as soon as you're able to engage with those individuals and listen to their kind of stories and the things that they've seen in the past and how their information can help inform the work that you're doing, it's super powerful to be able to kind of give them some benefit back. So see the feedback into your work that you're doing. And it's all well and good as writing kind of academic articles and publishing them and everything. But if they don't impact or benefit people, then you never really see that true value, I don't think. It's great to further knowledge, but it's great to further knowledge and provide benefit or work with individuals who are at risk of these things, especially when we're talking about flooding or wildfires or any kind of disaster.
Yeah. Do you know, I couldn't agree more. I completely agree. That's a great answer.
Good, I'm glad.
So we've kind of touched on like the academic element of your work, but perhaps on like a slightly more practical level, how do you find yourself normally working? Do you normally work like independently? Do you research independently? Or do you find yourself working as part of a team? Like, how do you normally? I just am interested to know.
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite variable, really. A lot of my work is quite independent, and then I have like a wider group of people who I talk to and get feedback on what I'm doing, whether that's kind of in a seminar or whether I've just called by someone's office or whether it's mentors who are reading it and advising on how best to proceed. But for my more community-based work, I usually work with colleagues. So Katie Parsons is an example of a person who I work with. So she's a research fellow at Loughborough as well. And we complement each other quite nicely. So she's very much climate change education and impacts on people, whereas I'm very much physical geography and processes. And so we complement each other really, really nicely in that we both bring our own expertise to the table and we can engage with different people in different ways without competing with each other. And it's kind of one of those things that was the sum of the parts is greater than them on their own or something. So Katie and I have worked on a few projects in the past looking at hedgerow gaps, for example, and engaging with young people in that. And my side was from the artificial intelligence and how we use aerial imagery to map them. And then Katie's was how can we work to educate these young people and to like foster that meaningful change. So I love working as part of a team because you have just people to bounce ideas off and you're not tackling this one big project on your own. But I think on a day-to-day basis, very independent, but also very much as a team. Depends what project I'm working on.
Great. That's so interesting because, yeah, you often think, oh, independent researcher, that you perhaps are kind of by yourself. So I like that you are able to tap into, is she in like a different department or is it still within the geography?
No, no, she's still within geography. She's just more human focused, I guess, whereas I'm more physical focused. I guess there's other people as well throughout kind of the wider university. So whether that's we have like a policy unit, for example, who advise us on how to submit policy briefs to Parliament, which I did earlier on in the year, and a whole range of like research managers and developers who help upskill us to apply for grants and kind of get the funding to do the work. So I guess the core research element can be quite independent, but the wider kind of excuse me, the wider kind of work piece can be quite a lot of people. The more I think about it, the more people I actually do work with. So I guess researching can be quite independent and solitary at times, and you have to kind of take a step back from that to see forest with the trees.
Great. So I think you've shared like some really great kind of insights there from your work. Do you have a favorite project that you're really proud of?
Hmm, that's a good question. I have lots of projects that I really like, and a lot of them are still ongoing. So it's difficult to kind of say that. One project that I think I am quite proud of because it's different to what I would normally do on like a daily basis, and it's a little bit more niche, but it's got that broader engagement piece. Is the hedgerow one that I alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
So the whole premise of that is that the UK is kind of really well known for its hedgerows. They're a kind of crucial wildlife kind of haven. They act as biodiversity corridors across landscapes. And the East Riding of Hull, so this is one I did at University of Hull, there particularly is quite famous through like the Hockney paintings. If you look at any painting by Hockney from East Riding, they've all got hedgerows in. But one of the things that we don't really think about or didn't really think about is the influence of hedgerow gaps. So whether that's for farmers to access fields or public rights of way, or whether it's because the hedgerow in that particular area has died off for whatever reason. And now, whenever I mention hedgerow gaps to anyone, they kind of get annoyed at me because that's all they see when they're driving on like the motorway and everything. You can spot hedgerow gaps everywhere. But the core premise of the project was to use artificial intelligence to basically map aerial imagery, so we could automatically classify where hedgerows are and then extract the gaps and kind of segregate them into for access or for underutilization, I think we called it in the end. But to do that, we had to get to a point where we had aerial imagery to classify. And I worked with some interns at the time, one in particular who classified about 32 square kilometers of land. And this is at
Wow.
kind of 25 centimeter pixel resolution. And Freya Cooper, who now works at, I think it's Norfolk County Council, she did a lot of work on that. And I was very grateful that I didn't have to do it, but she did an excellent job of it. But kind of the second part of that was we have all this information, but the imagery is from 2018. So how do we know that that is actually up to date and is doing what we want to? So that's how Katie and I started working together, in that we worked with a bunch of citizen scientists, and the initial idea was for them to help us classify hedgerow, and that they would go out into the field, or when they're on a walk or whatever, use an app and say, "Yeah, there is a hedgerow gap here," or "Yeah, this is hedgerow," and it would kind of be an interface between the GIS-based world and the real world. But that kind of morphed into the group of young people that we worked with. They wanted to write a children's story and kind of create a short magazine, a zine, to kind of communicate the importance of hedgerows and why we should care about these things. And they kind of went off and got their own funding to publish a book that's now available to buy on Amazon. And every school in East Riding and Hull has a physical copy that they want the money to kind of dish out to. And it's a really, really nice example of a project that can be approached from two different angles, but you're answering a very, very similar question. You've got my very kind of sciencey based stuff, and then the very human element of it. But there's clear overlaps between the two. And also, that's one of the ones that I've actually finished and I'm still actively working on at the moment. So it's quite nice to have a project that's kind of neatly tied up, and you can see all of the different outputs from different perspectives that influence a whole bunch of people in different ways.
Yeah, that sounds like a great project because I did notice it and thought, oh, that doesn't quite sit within your realms of like
Yeah,
hydrology, but I can see now how it fits with like your kind of engagement with the community and your interest in like AI, and how nice to be able to like like have that they've come up with that idea for having a book, and potentially that could inspire a child to then, and for the children in general to engage more with the environment, which that's only a positive thing. In my experience, like as a parent, I found with my children that they're better outside. So
yeah,
anything we can do to encourage them to go outside and to, it's not just being outside, it's engaging with being outside. Like you say, when you're speaking to people and then afterwards that all they could see were their hedgerow gaps, like job done.
exactly. You build awareness, right? But I think that also, from a more like flooding perspective, they clearly segregate boundaries, and whether that's kind of to attenuate flood water, they act as these
Oh,
physical barriers, I guess, to stop agricultural runoff. And, if we've got an
okay.
idea of where they are, we can then influence, okay, so say there's 6 meters of gap in this one particular hedgerow. We have a flow pathway running through there. So let's plant a hedgerow and then see how that then influences downstream flood risk. So
That's really interesting. Yes.
it's got lots of wide reaching kind of applications. It's just
Yeah.
taking it to that next step, I think.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so I work a lot in the West Midlands, and I quite often see like the hedgerows have ditches inside of them. I always say inside, like the hedge can be quite wide
Yeah,
and down middle, and whether or not the hedges were after the ditch or if the ditch has just found that there's like a natural hollow there and it's just followed the topography. So I think there's that other element as well. So I like the idea about disrupting flow paths, but perhaps as well, in my experience, I can find that sometimes they're actually flow routes sometimes as well.
yeah, okay.
But I completely understand about what you're saying because I'm always saying like you have to go outside and have a look. And by engaging with the community and getting them to go out and look for you, and like you say, like on a walk, and I'm sure they were like really happy to engage with that while they're on a walk. Yeah, we can just learn so much more. So yeah, like, and you've scaled it up by, bringing in lots of people to do that. So that's really positive. Yeah. Which actually leads us on really nicely to, as an academic, how do you define your like a successes in your projects?
Oh, okay. That's a really good question. I think a really tricky one.
Yeah.
A lot about being an academic is accepting failure, I think,
Okay.
in that, you run a model, doesn't work. You go out and collect some field data, it's corrupted. You've got a water level logger, right? We had some installed in Peru for about 18 months, lost it because of kind of flow coming down and, things moving. You submit a grant or a paper and, you get rejected for whatever reason because there's just so much competition. And I think a lot of the times people define success on how many papers they've got, how much
Mhm.
research income they've got. But to me, I think it's more about seeing that the work that I've done has made an impact, even if it's just to 5 people, and knowing that the research that I've done has gone into bettering or further educating them in what they wanted to be educated in. And I think that separating it out from all of the metrics and everything, that's the really important bit, is making sure that we are benefiting society. And that is success for a project for me. There's benefit to individuals where they can individually go on and see something, some positive outcome from the work that we've done.
That's a great answer. That was a difficult question. That is a great
Yeah.
answer
I
because
struggled quite a lot with that question, actually. I was trying to think if that was on your pre-prepared list or not, and I'm not sure. Or I might have missed it.
it is on the list.
Okay, does matter then.
No, I think that is such a great way metric of like measuring success, because that is ultimately what we should be considering, is who are we benefiting by doing this? We're not just researching to kind of further our knowledge. We are doing what we're doing because we want to make a difference. Like, you know, I completely agree with that. I think that's a great answer. So I've got another difficult question. I'm really sorry, but do you feel comfortable like sharing a project where you were disappointed or you were frustrated, and did you find a solution? And the reason I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. I'm not trying to trip anyone up. I think that we want to present a very perfect front to the world. And actually, by making mistakes and things going wrong, sometimes that's how we grow the most. And so if we can feel brave enough to share something that we've actually been able to overcome, perhaps we can share those lessons and we can help each other.
Yeah, I think it's super important to have a log of what we've done wrong because we're still learning from those things that have gone wrong, right? And
Yeah.
we can be disappointed by it, but that's just the game, is we learn and we grow. I think in terms of something that hasn't quite gone to plan or how I expected was kind of, well, probably what would have been the foundation for my current work with community groups and how we monitor different environments. And it kind of started off whilst I was doing my PhD. So it's like a side project. What I wanted to do, and we kind of have done this, is I wanted to collect a bunch of 360 imagery, so 360-degree imagery, and 3D models made on like a phone or an iPad to really put people into an environment. So they could put on a headset or go on the laptop and kind of look around in 360, or they could zoom into different things and really get an understanding for how the shapes of these different things actually are in reality. And that's so the reason for that was because a lot of the places where I go on fieldwork, a lot of people can't access, whether that's because of kind of their own accessibility, or there's not a footpath to it, or it's in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, or it's kind of up a mountain or whatever.
Hmm.
And kind of the hope for that project, which is called the 360 Lab, was to build this really, really rich data source of environments and places where people could go. And it's almost like you're there with the researcher, right? Doing things. And It was a lot more work than I'd originally anticipated. Just collecting the data is easy. You just go out and you press a button on the camera and it takes it, or you kind of use your phone and you scan the 3D model. But the amount of time and effort to process everything and to make it looking like really, really good and clean and accessible for a bunch of different people, as a naive kind of second or third year PhD student, whatever it was at the time, I didn't quite realize how much of a commitment that was. And it's just slowly taken years to get to the point where we're now able to produce these things a little bit more quickly and they're a little bit more effective. And one of the things that I kind of wish that I'd done in hindsight is have some sort of monitoring system in place so we have people feedback to say where we can improve on.
Right.
And I think it's important. What it made me realize through that difficulty and that failure, and not just parking it and not just half finishing it, was to make sure that you're working with the right people with the right expertise and you've got the time and the space to learn how to do these things. And I think
Yeah.
it's only just now that I feel confident that I'm able to do that, which is great for me now. But back then, when you're trying to do all these different projects, you're trying to get stuff off the ground. How do you, it goes back to that metric of success, right? Was I successful in doing that? Did we reach the right people? I don't know. To me, it's a cool resource still that opens up conversations more than anything moving forward. But in its current state, it still needs a bit more work to get to the point where I wanted it to be at 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I can really relate to that. And I think, like, in my own personal experience, like, I want things to go out and them to be perfect. And actually, they don't always need to be perfect, especially like kind of the technology that you're talking about. I'm guessing no one else was doing that when you started doing it. And so actually it like was it the size of the files or was it like how good it was, like how clear it was? Do you think maybe you could have put it out there and it just have been not as perfect as you wanted? Would that be one of the things, like, do you feel, or is it just the fact that it took so long to learn it and actually maybe you should have outsourced it to someone else and handed it off to someone else?
I think it's the technical ability to be able to be creative enough whilst understanding the software for all of these different elements to stitch together.
Right.
But at the time, I think actually the biggest issue was my time that I had. So it was
Right.
a super low funded project. We got a bit of money for it, which was great from the British Society for Geomorphology and various other sources, like an internal one at Hull. And they were super supportive in building kind of the core infrastructure around that.
Yeah.
But since I was a PhD student, PhD comes first, right?
Yeah.
And this is a side project that just kind of trickles along at the side. And I think at the time I hadn't really anticipated the amount of time and my capacity that would have to go towards this to make it something that was really, really good. So I adopted the it's better that it's done and finished than it is perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that because now I've grown from that and I've taken learnings in that I can better manage my time, or I know when I'm submitting a grant how much time this is actually going to take me.
Yeah.
But there's this challenge in academia, I think, which is you have to keep publishing to survive. You have to win grants, and there's so much pressure to do all of these things, and so it's difficult to manage that pressure of you need to have this much research income, you need to have these many papers in order to even just get a job. So I found that quite difficult, and I think I overcommitted during my PhD what I actually could do. I still delivered everything, but could it have been better if I had kind of streamline myself a little bit, probably. But then that's what my hindsight's 2020, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I I do really like the idea of, like, kind of the remote field trip. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, so other people have done it at the same time, which for a more teaching focus aspect, whereas mine was just go and have an explore. There's no real focus. Just go to these places that you can't access. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it is like a remote field trip or looking at certain things a bit more focused maybe on what you want to explore. So we've got stuff by the coast, for example. We've got natural flood management models, and we've got some 360 tours that are in there. They've gotten better as time has gone on, but it's just kind of engaging the right people, I guess, and getting the right kind of feedback to improve it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And yeah, there's definitely some really great lessons in there, really. Like, I don't think in my if you want my opinion, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah. I mean, I've been brutally honest,
I
so
don't think you
please.
did. I don't think that you could have done anything differently because, like you say, you have the pressures of your job, the pressures to deliver, but you had a great idea. And I always think it's better to have a go and
Yeah,
fail than kick yourself. Why didn't I start that 4 years ago? And look where I could be so much further along, now if I'd started 4 years ago. So whilst I can completely understand the frustration that, if I had only known then what I know now, but actually you only know what you know now because you started that then. And I think, especially in your early careers as well, for me, I always felt like, oh, there's so many opportunities, and I just wanted to run into all of them and have a go at everything. And actually, it's okay. You've got time to slow down, enjoy it. And sometimes I didn't enjoy, because I was just so like, running around
yeah,
crazy. So I think that's a really, really good answer because I hope that, younger, earlier careers people listen and they hear that, I'm 20 years nearly into my career, like we're reflecting back and being like, do you know, if I were speaking to me then, it's okay. Just slow down. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. This is all going to figure out. And I'm sure that you only know now how long it takes you to do a proposal because you've written so many. But like, even if you had someone that sat there and said, it's going to take you X amount of times, that might not be true for you at all because you're a completely separate person to them. So something that might take you 3 hours, they might do in an hour, So actually, only you can learn that lesson. So, yeah, no, great.
yeah. I completely agree with you, and it has led to more research income, and we're currently writing a paper at the moment. We're on field work next week to collect more data around this stuff that's central to some of my future work. So it's a piece of the jigsaw that I didn't even know existed, or I didn't know the jigsaw existed, right? And I'm slowly filling it in as I move forward. And
Yeah.
as you say, you need to build that foundational knowledge and make those mistakes. Otherwise, you don't know what's going to be useful in the future.
No, not at all. Yeah. Um, So I'm going to move on to my main question, which is, do you think that restoring natural processes and features will defend us against our biggest challenges of flooding, drought, water quality, food security, biodiversity? I mean, I think from our conversations, I've kind of drawn that you're probably looking at hydrology and flooding and climate, those kind of climate elements and biodiversity perhaps as well. But I, I'm asking this question because I feel that perhaps we're considering nature-based solutions as like a bit of an add-on to our hard engineering approaches. So I'm trying to gauge from people what people think. Like, do we think that this is actually capable of solving some of these problems, like helping us solve these problems, or is this, how far do these solutions go? So I'm really interested to know what you think about this.
I think that they are a part of the answer. I don't think I don't think we're ever going to be able to fully defend against any of the issues that you mentioned. I think a lot of them we're going to have to learn to live with or learn new ways to adapt to how the climate is changing. Especially with water, it's so uncertain, I guess, at the moment still what the rain's gonna be like next week, for example, or how the ground is gonna respond, how the river's gonna respond. And there's already so much that we don't really know in terms of a kind of behavioral response, and also how people interact with those different elements. So we might know it from a hydrological perspective, but are people going to do what we predict they're going to do? You hear stories about people driving over fords when they're kind of 40 centimeters deep and then the car gets stuck in it. In model land, or in, when you're not in that scenario, thinking maybe a little bit more rationally and don't want to take the risk, you would go, of course they're not going to cross over that. It's dangerous. But people do because it's risk reward. And the reward of getting home 2 hours earlier is greater than well, having a 2-hour detour, right, or potentially being swept off the road. And I think that in terms of where nature-based solutions come in, again, I think they're part of the puzzle, part of the answer. They're part of how we adapt. But there's always going to be a need for that hard engineering, that really hard infrastructure. If you think about the power plants, for example, you wouldn't necessarily want to protect them from flood risk using trees and kind of catchment diversion things, because if something happens to that power plant, you're potentially losing power for millions of people, and that's got a massive impact. So I think it's just about the balance between the two and becoming more sustainable where we can be, but also realizing that we have to live with these things and how they're going to change in the future in some ways that we don't really know at the moment, especially when you're in environments where, you're being built on floodplains. It's like, well, it's going to flood because it's flooded here for the past 2,000 years. It's not a surprise that it floods. You can't
Mm,
be mad about it, but we need to think about how we're building sustainably in places like Vietnam and on the Mekong River. They have houses built on stilts because they know that the water gets up to that level, right?
mm-hmm.
We don't
Yeah.
really have that here. We put in a swale or some studs to try and mitigate the effect of that, and then get surprised when we flood, despite living in somewhere that's, I don't know, just in case I accidentally name it, we're going to go with, I live on floodplain road. And it's like, I'm not surprised that the water's getting up to the bottom of my house. And that's dreadful to people who live there. But I also think that we need a big education piece on why these issues are important and what impacts they're going to actually have to people, making them personal as well.
Mm. I really like the first part of your answer, which was we don't know what people are going to do. And I think that is such an important point. Like, even from like so you gave the example in the sense of like that someone wouldn't, we would think, oh, well, they wouldn't drive through that. They potentially would. And I mean, I've got photos of people trying to drive through very deep water during really bad floods. So we, but like to develop that idea, like people driving and their cars getting stranded and or their cars being parked in car parks that then flood and that they're then mobilized. And we've not taken that into account. I mean, we saw that in Boscastle quite a few years ago, the cars being washed out to sea and them banging into houses and goodness knows what along the way. And so I think that's such an interesting thought. Like we've not taken into account people and how they're going to behave. And actually, as well, just to develop that even further, like people in their gardens. So perhaps their houses aren't in the floodplain, but maybe their gardens are. And actually, like people putting in like garden offices at risk of flooding, in that flood zone area, in sometimes in the functional floodplain area, or their garden sheds, or they put up a closed board fence. So actually really taking into consideration people is actually really, really important. Definitely. Yeah. I do agree with your answer that I do think that where we are, definitely in the UK with having construction on floodplains and a long legacy of that as well. I mean, it's not a recent thing. I mean, we have Bridgewater and even London itself, lots of the major cities, they're built on major rivers. And so, yeah, I completely agree that hard engineering is part of it. But yeah, I think that nature-based solutions from a flooding perspective, personally, I think that they are an important part of the story. Yeah, and like just like I really want to have this conversation because actually, like I like that you're looking at sediment movements around natural flood management because I do think that that is one element, one complexity. And like I'm interested in the other complexity, which is like groundwater and infiltration recharge. And I think that's another complexity that perhaps our current modeling systems aren't always, perhaps they're not always as in depth looking at. And so perhaps with the nature based solutions, these natural food managements, maybe we're not looking, at all the complexities to really understand the complete system. And yeah, I think like you were talking before about the sediment movement and actually understanding upper catchment to lower catchment. And we talk about whole catchment responses to flooding, but actually looking at those complexities and actually understanding them and replicating them in our model, I think they're a massive challenge. I do think they're a massive challenge. So I'm really glad you're doing this research because I do think it is really, really important. And I think, yeah, this I like that. It's good. So I'm gonna
Yeah, I was just going to say, just building off what you've
yeah,
just said, our models are only representations of reality, and they're always wrong, right? They're just some are more wrong than others. And I guess it's important to think about what is the most important thing that we need to think about from a base scenario. It is water. If we're sticking with the flooding angle, it is water. But then at what point does it become kind of sediment and then wood and then cars moving through the system? You just need to look at a picture of Valencia and you see all the cars that are stacked up on
yeah,
top of each other, right? At what
yeah.
point does this debris in the system influence the flood hydraulics, and what are the feedbacks behind that? They're just so complicated to consider at those larger scales. And I
Mhm,
think it would be really interesting in the next kind of 10, 20 years and how technology and computing power progresses to actually think about some of these different scenarios. I
mm.
mean, you're saying putting sheds at the bottom of gardens, right, or a fence up. We can't model that. There's no way we can model that.
No,
But what are the cumulative impacts of all of these different changes, or astroturf, for example, concreting over your garden? And if people want to do that, that's up to them. But there's no way we can consider that in our model. So it's no wonder they're wrong most of the time.
no, because it's not like, oh, one person concretes over their
Yeah.
driveway. It's with multiple throughout the whole catchment, that cumulative effect, the impact, and like you say, we can't model that level of detail. So that our models are going to be wrong. But like we should always be saying when we're talking about modeling, we should I always feel like our language needs to be like, this is not definitive, this is just estimation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd just like to move on to like whether or not you have any advice. I feel like you've given a lot of advice actually already,
Cool.
but like just like, is there something that you would like to? I'm not phrasing this correctly. Is there something in line with your work
Sorry.
that? Yeah, do you carry on?
You don't intervene, do you?
No,
You're good.
I just need to turn there's I think one between 3 rooms.
Oh, sorry, we're in like shared offices. I'm just need to get off TV remote. Thought I'd interrupt you before. Yeah. Sorry.
No, no, that's fine. I was fuddling the question anyway. Let's go for it. Is there something in line with your work that a person such as a landowner could do for themselves that could have a meaningful benefit for their project? So we've had some really great conversations about citizen science. Is there anything that you can think of that would be like more generalized, I guess, that could help people, like just in line with what your kind of research areas are, if they were getting involved and they were maybe they're considering trying to understand sediment movements within, say, that perhaps they're a community group, say, and they have natural flood management measures in. Is there something is there some advice you could give to them that they could do themselves that could actually contribute? Like, say, like it could lay like a baseline for, say, academics or someone else coming in to help them in the future.
Yeah, I think the number one thing for me is collecting evidence around what it is that you want to see change, right? So a lot of the time we talk about having baseline information. So all that means, right, is we have information before we do something, in my world anyway.
Yeah.
And I think if anyone's wanting to do anything, whether it's with kind of landscape consultants or whether it's with academics, industry partners, whoever, or yourself, is to really like take a couple of photos of it at different times in the year and just see how it changes. One of the things we don't really think about, especially in river systems, is how they change slowly over time. And that's really difficult to see unless you're regularly going there and you're regularly looking for it, right? And so I think just having that awareness of, okay, over a period of a year or 2 years, if you can, how does the thing that you're interested in evolve throughout time? And then how can we use those learnings to better understand, okay, this is what it's doing already. If we put this in here or do something over there, how is that then going to impact the ultimate kind of objective of the problem? And I guess there's a similar thing with if you were to change things in your garden, for example, and you every year this bit of it floods because of X reason. Concreting that over isn't going to solve it, but understanding where that water is coming from might help you divert it, for example, whether it's, I don't know, like a leaky drain or something. You need to be there and observant to spot it and see those changes. And the other thing would be if there's a project that you're interested in, but maybe don't have the time or resource to do. Me as an academic, I know everyone else will be as well, is always striving for individuals who are keen, who are engaged, and who have something that might be interesting. And if you have data for that, it makes it a lot more viable for us to get involved and do different bits of work with those individuals. And that can be from anything on any topic, from kind of air pollution to flooding to biodiversity. If you're building up that evidence base, which is really easy to do by taking photos, and I guarantee the majority of people will have done it already. It's just understanding how powerful that information and your kind of stories and experiences around that actually are, and how useful they can be for everyone involved, really.
That is great. That is so great because people can actually go out and do that. Like, if someone has a community project now doing natural flood management or something like that, they can literally just go out and take photos. And like lots of these groups, I'm sure they're areas that they walk regularly, or it's a landowner and they go visit and check on it regularly. If they just go and take photos, and I guess even if they've got things in place already, just seeing how they change over time. But like you say as well, before a project goes in, they're just thinking about it, just going out regularly, taking photos. So what you're saying as well is that if you've got that backlog of information, can that help them, like kind of when they're going to find someone to help them with a project, that can help them, that can, does it motivate people, do you think, having that backlog of information? Do you think it makes people want to be more engaged in it? Is that what you were I
Yeah,
sorry,
I think it's easier to see the first part of the story because you're seeing this change in front of you happen. And a lot of the time when you speak to individuals and say, I saw this last year and I saw this 20 years ago and 30 years ago it was doing this. A lot of it's very anecdotal, but it's difficult to say, okay, how much really was that in comparison to what I've seen from my experience with flooding? So it's really difficult to relate to certain things because one person's bad weather, for example, can be, it's quite grey, it's overcast. And another person's bad weather can be it's minus 20 degrees Celsius, snowing, a hailstorm. For others, that's fantastic. That's what they want. And so I think it helps with the language barrier, even though we're maybe all speaking, English or Spanish or whoever you're speaking to, not the language barrier in terms of actual language, but in terms of the technicality of it all.
yeah,
If I said to you, wow, that's a big flood over there, do you think that's kind of 1 meter of inundation, or is that 30 centimeters? And how much of a difference does that make to your mental model of what you've built up based
yeah,
off your kind of 20 years of experience, right?
yeah,
So I think an easy thing that the majority of people have already done already, when you plant a new garden, right, you take a picture before and then you do stuff and you take a picture after, and then it
yeah,
all grows year on year because you're proud of it.
yeah,
And I think anything like that that you've already got or can go out and do quite easily is really, really powerful just for communicating whatever it is that you're interested in.
yes, yes, completely agree. Completely agree. So I'm going to tap you up for some more advice. So,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to someone? Because you're dishing it out and it's great. What advice would you give to someone starting out on their journey to implement measures to restore natural features and processes? Would it be what you've just said, or would you give any other advice if someone's just getting started?
I would know what you want your outcome to be. So
Oh,
do you,
yes.
like you can start by doing stuff. Right? Again, going back to the garden analogy, do you want it to be flowered all year, or do you want a herb garden, or do you want to plant kind of potatoes? And what do you actually want from what you're doing?
Yeah.
And then I would say go back and look at different examples of how people have achieved that. So
Yeah.
YouTube's great. There's loads of stuff on YouTube, and you can talk to different people in your community who might have done these things. There might be different forums online where you can just ask questions and learn about it. And I think people on the internet are generally very, very helpful, and there's a huge wealth of knowledge out there. even on kind of Reddit, for example, just asking questions in the right forum is super powerful in some instances.
Mm.
And so I think I would encourage people to really have an idea of what you want out of it rather than just diving in. And I guess if you don't know what you want out of it and you're happy for that, then it's just fun to get started, but start small and kind of build your way up.
Yeah. 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 I think I agree with that. Like, have a clear goal. I do think you're right, because sometimes, so I agree with both of those elements. I agree with, if you are going for it, then having a clear goal, then you can be clear when you've achieved it. I think, and if when you're communicating and you're trying to engage with people, having a clear goal is really, really important. But equally, if you don't know, just having a go, playing around, does this work? Does that not work? Yeah,
And
I can see that too.
And I think just accepting that if it doesn't do what you wanted it to do, then that's okay. You can change things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And failure is just part of learning to get to the point that you really want.
Yeah, there's some strong themes coming out of this conversation.
Failure is a big thing in academia, and I'm only just coming to grips with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's a really important topic to discuss, because I think, personally, I think, we always, from my perspective, I see that people want everything to be presented and everything's perfect. And we only want to share on LinkedIn and
Yeah.
Instagram, like, the final perfect outcome. And we're not always sharing the failures and things that didn't go right. And actually, that's how we got to here. For you with your remote field trips, you had to find that actually this is taking a long time to learn this software. This is taking a lot of time, and I can't deliver what I want to deliver, and that frustration. For me, I've tried a few different things. I've experimented with a few different things. I've built my app and my platform, and yeah, found frustrations along the way with that. And actually, it's taken me a while to accept that actually that was an important part of my journey. I felt like it did feel like a big failure, because it didn't do what thought it was going to do, and it didn't go where I wanted it to go. But actually, I've learned so much by doing it that I'm really glad I have done it. And I think, especially for early careers people, it's like, just have a go. It doesn't matter, even if you don't complete it, even if it all goes wrong, just keep going, keep going, keep going. Like, everybody goes through this. Like, I'm sat here as a consultant, you're sat there as an academic, and we're saying the exact same thing. We've had we've been working for a long time, and actually that is just part of life, is that, it doesn't quite work how you think it is, but actually you learn from it and you get better, and
It,
positives
it,
come from it.
exactly. If it was easy, anyone would do it for anything, and nothing easy is worth doing, right? They're the two things that kind of
Yeah.
go hand in hand. And I
Ex-
think don't be worried to just try stuff. And if you fail, you lose what, a couple of days of your time.
Yeah.
Grand scheme of things, that's it's all right. You
Yeah.
learn so much by failing.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that's, yeah. What a great thing to come out of this conversation. I really like that. So I've got some fun questions.
Yeah,
Really. The reason why I've done fun questions is because I think that it's really nice to remind people that we are all human and we all like similar things, and we don't just go to work and come home and go to work and come home. We are actually interested in other things as well. Right, fun question. So, coffee or tea?
gotta be coffee every morning. Gotta have a coffee. I am partial to a tea, but
Yeah. Yeah, I love
yeah.
a coffee. Go for a walk or read a book?
Oh, I like both. You see, I would at the moment I favour going for a walk because the weather's great.
Yeah.
So, well, great. Yeah, I think go for a walk.
Yeah. If you had a day off from all responsibilities, home and work, no restrictions, what would you do?
Mm. I think if I had absolutely nothing to do, no responsibilities, I would go do some hill walking and go to the Lake District or something and just middle of nowhere, just enjoy the kind of the scenery and being peaceful and kind of exploring a bit, going to different places that I haven't been before.
Sounds great. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Get away from screens. That's the main thing. It's great talking to different people, but all my work is like modeling and computer focused, and it's great to just get away from that and completely switch off.
Yeah. And the Lake District, no Wi-Fi, no internet, just
Exactly.
middle of nowhere, nothing but nature. That sounds
So I've
perfect.
started choosing some of my field sites. Just can I talk to people, or am I completely on my own?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Josh. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your time and your insights. I think there's some real great nuggets that have come out of that conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great chat to you. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please can I ask that you share it with someone else that you think might find it interesting. And on a final note, I just want to add a short disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a replacement for professional advice. We suggest that you seek out the help of a trained professional for help with your specific situation.